listen to 50 years of people playing the Telecaster. People have said a lot of good things with it since then, but they've said it with the vocabulary he created then.
I know that he had one of the first few. Apparently it was stolen or lost.
I knew where it was. It was Blythe, California. Saw it, the very first one. Leo didn't have it, Jimmy didn't have it. Farmer and Blythe did.
It's a very cool guitar, and the fact that it was his makes it even cooler, you know.
Jimmy was the first one that I'm aware of that was using the guitar. He was on the El Monte Legion Hall show, barn dance thing with Cliffy Stone, and Jimmy played the electric guitar on that. He was promoting it.
Some real hot licks were played on this guitar.
Sounds great. Can I take this one home?
Yeah, that's pretty nice, huh?
Well, you know, the Skydivers movie is one of the worst movies ever made.
The actors are the worst actors ever.
The band?
Sure.
Jimmy Bryant.
It's not unusual. Whoa!
If people have ever seen the show Mystery Science Theater 3000, where there was two little robots and a guy sitting in front of a big theater screen and taking the worst movies and totally making fun of them.
Hey, the big one's back. There she is.
That one. Can you believe that?
Thank you. That's good. That's enough. Thank you.
It was late at night. My brother was just surfing the TV, and he came across this, and he was watching. He said, "What the heck?"
The other guy says, "Well, of course, with Jimmy Bryant in his band." And I was like, "What?"
George Herman Ruth on guitar.
Come on, you want a piece of me? What do you do?
Right about that time, my dad came in the door. And he looked at the TV, and he looked at me and said, "If you ever tell anybody about this, I will kill you."
He hated that.
Believe me, it deserved to be made fun of.
Here he is now, the star of our show, Spike Jones.
So Spike Jones, on his show, would have an amazing cast of musicians behind him and guests on the show, and Billy Barty, and those types of crazy, zany characters. And you mix it up with the crazy, zany music that they did. And his show was just all about having fun.
So here with Jingle Bells is the band that plays for fun.
Well, Jimmy was the two-edged sword. You either loved him or you hated him. Even now, when you go out in the world, if you mention his name, you never know what's going to come back. We had music in common from the background. I was a music major in high school and 2.5 years of college. We got married in September of 1970. 2 days after we were married was my 22nd birthday. And he told me, now that we're married, these are the rules. And I mean, it was this whole, not a good side. He would control my environment, and that he would tell people, you know, you don't cuss around her, you don't say these things, you don't do this, you don't do that. We traveled all the time, especially when we had Karina. The back seat of our Cadillac was her, you know, her room, and she was very good at being quiet and coloring and doing things in the back seat.
The back seat in our Cadillac was set up with my crayons and my dog and a bed. So we'd travel for miles and miles and miles, and I'd just have a whole world in the back seat.
But she longed to have a backyard. But it was exciting and fun because of all the adventures that we had in traveling, all the people that we met and the places that we went to, the things that we saw.
Somebody told him that, hey, there's this hot steel player down the street. So Dad on his break went down and said, you know, hey, I'm Jimmy Bryant. I'm playing at the Fargo Club. Come dig me. And Speedy went to check him out, and they started playing, and it's just unbelievable team.
I've never seen a twosome that could bring more out of two instruments than Jimmy and Speedy.
The combination was magic. I mean, I think Jimmy played with a lot of people later on, and Speedy West played with a lot of people later on, but they never captured that magic in a bottle that they did when they played together.
Jimmy Bryant, Speedy West music overlapped into the 60s. And I think I used the word bizarre or something earlier when I was talking about the solos, tricks on the guitar, tricks, you know, about the fingerboard as much as there were tricks about the steel guitar that obviously Speedy was using as well.
You put those two amazing players with those two new instruments together, it just changed everything. You can hear it today in those recordings from 1952. They've never been matched.
I've heard a lot of steel guitar players and a lot of electric guitar players. Never in my life have I ever heard like these two fellows are individually. You put them together and boy, you've got the very best. Here we go with Jimmy Bryant, Speedy West, and Flying High.
Dad was playing this hotel in Washington, D.C. after the war. My mom went into that room, she was selling cigarettes, saw my dad and said, I'm gonna marry that guy. They got married.
I think Jimmy was a great father. I don't know of anything bad at all or any problems. I know he and Gloria were divorced, but I don't know of anything bad about Jimmy. But as far as his personal life with his wife and children, I'm sure was great.
Dad was an absentee father at best. I think he was supposed to pay $50 a month per kid, 6 kids, but you know, he'd make $300 a day, and you know, he didn't pay anything, hardly ever.
And he'd get home about, what, 2:30 some nights when he came home, and he'd want to take Jay to breakfast. And Jay was only a little guy, and I'd think, oh no, not again. And then they have this tug of war with Jay, Mom and Dad, and then they'd call the cops, and oh my goodness, poor Jay. But you probably don't want to use this.
Me being the first son, I was with my dad all the time. And so I would go to bars with him, you know, at the age of 10 or 12, and I would sit there, you know, drinking a Coke.
I love Jimmy. I didn't appreciate some of the things he did to Gloria and the kids.
I know that my mom even told me that she was at a, you know, five and dime, you know, cafe where you at the diner, whatever, with her mom, my grandmother. And the waitress heard them talking about Dad, and she said, oh, do you know Jimmy Bryant? And my mom looked at her and said, yeah, I know Jimmy Bryant. She said, oh, I've dated him. I mean, I was like, my mom told me that. And, you know, knowing my mom, she just didn't say anything, but she was ticked off, I'm sure. Oh yeah, that's just Dad.
That's all I want to say. I love Jimmy and I love Gloria.
Dad married 3 times. My mom and him got divorced in '62. He married a woman named Charlene, beautiful woman. Took us kids in like we were her own, and his third wife, Patty, they had a daughter named Karina. It's my half-sister.
So when he cleaned up his act with Charlene is when he probably could have gone a little bit further with the business side of the music. And I'm not sure what happened and why it didn't happen. Although then he got remarried for the 3rd time, and I think that's when he started drinking again.
Was he reformed by the time he met me regarding women? No.
He was more interested in himself.
He was distant. He was very strict.
He really was a good dad. But as soon as you got old enough to have an independent thought, and he wasn't the world to you, and he wanted you to do something, and you said, no, I can't, I don't want to, then he kind of pulled back.
He was so many different people. When it came to home life, being an entertainer, the drinking years, the non-drinking years, it was all different. When he was drinking, it wasn't that good. When he wasn't, it was great.
He would do awful things, say terrible things to people.
I could care less about people like people I've worked for just only for money. Roy Rogers, Dale Evans, especially Dale, on down the line. Johnny Cash, never could have got any place without the musician.
Really, when the negative memories started happening was when he got really sick.
And he'd had a surgery. They didn't get it all of his cancer. And he wasn't dealing right.
He would go down and drink and be sitting in bars.
And he would down like 6 or 7 beers just like that.
And then he'd come home at all hours of the night.
And then I guess they would just argue.
He was very bitter that he was sick.
You know, kind of like I pictured him as like a raging maniac at that time.
Drink vodka, shoot it with beer, and it made him maniacal, actually.
I remember sitting in the driveway of my brother Jay's house, and my dad bashing a guitar on his front lawn.
The drinking was a much bigger of a deal after the war, and I think that, they call it shell shock back then, they call it post-traumatic stress syndrome today. The war messed with Dad's head in a big, big way. And I think that had a lot to do with his heavy drinking.
It was like Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. You don't know what you're going to get sometimes.
In the movie Walk the Line, when you see Johnny Cash and everybody else on stage drunk, I could picture my dad up there.
And it was a way that he could cope.
He just was so unhappy with his situation. You could tell he wanted to make everybody else around him miserable.
He did some things that ended up with us having a slight altercation.
It's scary to see your dad do stuff like that.
And then bringing somebody else back to our hotel room. And I just said, that's it, I'm done. So I took the car. Karina was staying with a friend, went and picked her up, and we left town at midnight or something out of Nashville and drove back to California.
Jimmy had an ego. He knew he was great, he knew he was a genius, and he wanted to be treated like that.
He'd had a jam with Hank Garland one night, and they met up the next day, and he said, and they were started an argument. He said, hey, I cut you last night, I outplayed you or whatever, and it ended up being a fist fight, so I've heard.
I never really saw him pissed. When he'd get mad, he'd be real quiet. And he'd start drinking.
That's just the way he was. I mean, they partied. That was the time. That was the era. And he drank a lot.
He didn't care if he played with the big guys. He was perfectly happy playing with all the small clubs and stuff. He loved being in front of those people and making them happy.
He also would not fly. His traveling was limited to where he could drive to.
And because he wouldn't do what you told him to do, ultimately I think that hurt his career over the years, was that ego.
So he wouldn't go to Japan when they wanted Jimmy and Speedy West to go to Japan and do a tour. He wouldn't do any of that stuff.
When you're given the blessing of genius, it's oftentimes as much a curse as it is a blessing.
And he had a list he'd given me of people, if they called, I don't work for them.
And people who are good at shaking hands and making friends and networking have better careers than those who don't.
Well, my money's good as anybody else's, and not to him it's not.
He had to push his records by himself. He had to go to the radio stations and say, you know, please play this. Or he'd have to bribe them. And it was just a different time.
Jimmy was doing sessions for one of the biggest record labels in the entire country, playing on hit records that were at the top of the charts. And when Ken Nelson, the producer, told him to play more commercial, Jimmy said, no, I'm not going to do that.
You always have to have that innovator that doesn't get the recognition, that people actually watch him, and then when they become stars, people want to be like them.
I personally think that there were a lot of people that were jealous of his talent at that time.
They didn't go out of their way to help my father be a bigger celebrity than what he was.
I think he definitely burned bridges at some point in his life.
I think Jimmy was just doing his job.
Although he liked it when people knew who he was, and he loved the applause, and he loved the attention he got, but that's where it ended. The bars closed and he went home.
And you know, when you're dealing with country western musicians and little bars and things like that, a lot of people don't like dealing with that sort of personality. Ultimately, I think that hurt his career over the years, was that ego.
He and Nashville just clashed.
Because all the country artists, really, the ones that were really selling records, they were cut in Hollywood. Right, Bear? That's right.
If you had a hit out here in LA, which this is where all the recording was coming from, right? And you went to Nashville, like playing the Grand Ole Opry, you didn't get on that stage. And Dad didn't care if he was an outsider. He didn't give a hell what people thought about him.
Nashville didn't mean a thing back then. It had the Grand Ole Opry, and that was it.
He went back there and played, and he had a long guitar chord. And he walked down the stairs and went into the crowd. That caused hell. He was showing everybody else up. But you know what? That's just Dad. He was just being a musician. He was being a showman. But still, I mean, it was Nashville. It's a corporate, internally run town.
There was a lot of tension. One of them was Chet Atkins. And he would always, when he'd see Chet, he'd always be talking under his breath. And so it was like, shh, shh. See, I don't know why he was bitter about Chet Atkins and some of the other Nashville musicians. And that was a period of time I wasn't around where that grew from.
Roy Clark hated Jimmy because Jimmy could play the guitar and he could just sit there and play and make it look so easy. And if you ever watch Roy Clark trying to play the same thing, there is sweat pouring down. He's just humped over the guitar.
I could never understand why Dad was never on the Grand Ole Opry or whatever. Now I understand it.
You know, there was a transition. I mean, Elvis came out in '58 to California. You know, rock and roll was just it. And the country players, you know, they took a back seat.
I remember Doug telling me, Jimmy just looked him straight in the eyes and said, Doug, I'm tired. I want to go home. Doug loved Jimmy. And he said, okay, I'll take you home.
I believe it was my mother, and she announced that Dad had cancer and, you know, and that he wasn't doing well, that he was going to have surgery in Nashville.
They called it a benefit. I saw it more as a tribute at the Palomino.
Well, I was at the benefit at the Palomino Club, and I know that he didn't want to stop playing.
It was a great night. They had standing room only, there's no question. As far as people there and musicians and all, it was a wonderful night and a great tribute to Jimmy.
I went to the benefit at the Palomino, and you know, there were a lot of players up there, and he asked me to play, you know, and I was a little nervous. I didn't get up there, you know.
But when you look at the photos from that night, everybody else looks pretty young, and Jimmy just looks like a really, really old man. And you can tell that, you know, the hard living and the fast life and the drinking and everything else had caught up to him.
I noticed a big change. He was thinner and grayer than the time I'd seen him before. I hadn't seen him for a couple of years, I believe.
Doug had a motorhome. So he put Jimmy in the motorhome, drove him to the Palomino, parked behind the Palomino, so Jimmy would have a comfortable place. If he got tired inside, he'd go out and lay down.
And he got out of the motorhome and he had a pillow up against his chest. And I thought, oh, my dad looks so old.
So there was, I don't know, hundreds of musicians at that party, and they all got up and did their thing for Jimmy.
And then they said that Jimmy Bryant was going to take the stage. And I'm thinking, oh, come on, now stop. And he walked slowly up. He was at the bar area, and they helped him. And he went up to the stage, and he played, and he played, and he played. Unbelievable. I mean, the whole place was packed, and just put on a great show.
He sat right by the bandstand at one particular point and played fiddle, played guitar, and it was a great night.
And it was just amazing what he could do. I never appreciated my father's talents until that night. And he was sick.
I wish I'd played one more time for him, but I wouldn't have known what to play anyway. You know, wonderful to see him that last time. You know.
He enjoyed that night.
But he continued to play as far as I know in Nashville, and then when it got real bad, he went back to Georgia because his sister took care of him, my Aunt Lorraine, who was a retired nurse, retired RN, and he felt that that was home. His mama was there, and his brothers and sisters, and I think they told him he was terminal, and that's where he wanted to be.
Got him in the motorhome and headed back to Georgia.
He got put in the hospital there at Lakeland, Florida, so we ended up staying there.
His lung cancer did not progress in the standard way that the doctors expected.
I was in the Air Force, and they were sending me overseas. And I wrote letters, I got, in touch with people. I was trying to say, look, my dad's dying. I want to go to an Air Force base near Georgia where he's at. And they didn't let that happen.
They told me that because he was who he was, they did what they could. Otherwise, when they saw what was going on, they would have just closed him up and said that was it.
And I would say, just God, take him. He's so unhappy, and just take him now, so that it wouldn't put us both through more misery.
He was in denial about it, and he drank heavier than ever.
And all I could understand was, okay, well, if you have lung cancer, why are you smoking?
And I had no tolerance for cigarettes. And I used to nag him about it because I'd already lost 2 friends smoking cigarettes.
Even though he was on oxygen, he would smoke, he would just have a heart attack.
I even tried to get him on cigars because you don't inhale them. I thought it'd help. Didn't work.
So I would steal his cigarettes and try to hide him, and then that would frustrate him.
But I seen him get frustrated and throw an instrument on the ground and stomp it. I was just shocked. And he would say things to me like, you're young, you have a life ahead of you, I want your life. And I'd say, you can't have my life, it's my life, you had your life.
And then, I got the call that it was pretty much time to go, So the military flew me back and spent time with him, for his final days.
Come to find out, when he'd gone to Georgia with all his medication, they never opened up his medication bag. They were giving him any of his medication. So he was not in good shape.
I was there when he passed away. In fact, Johnny and I got there at the same time.
Uncle Gene asked him if he believed in God, and Dad said, I feel different. I remember those last 3 words, I feel different.
His family told me, but I was not included, that just before he died, he got religion.
And he was asking for forgiveness for everything in his life. I'm sure of it.
They were keeping me away. They were working on him. He wasn't religious. After having radiation therapy one time, he said he couldn't stand the smell. And I said, what do you mean you can't stand the smell? He says, my flesh is burning. He says, you forget I was in Germany in World War II.
But he showed me this shrapnel in his hands, and, said a grenade went off, and he didn't really want to talk about it. He never would.
My Aunt Lorraine came into the kitchen and said, your dad wants to talk to you, wants to tell you something. And it just never dawned on me to drop what I was doing and go in there and talk to my dad.
Just being there with him was just all that mattered.
Dad, you want to talk to me? I mean, I would just, hello, are you sleeping? And my Aunt Lorraine told me, says, oh, I think he's in a coma.
It was almost like he waited for us.
He died when I was 9 years old.
He died at his sister's home, Lorraine Epps' home in Georgia. I always say he died to a standing room only audience of family.
So one of the last times I saw him was he's in the VA hospital. They made an announcement that, Jimmy Bryant was there. Somebody gave him a guitar, and he asked if I could go get him his guitar. And I said, oh, Dad, man, you can play anything, just play that one. So he tried to play it, and it didn't work out too well because he was real weak. He got frustrated, and I just thought, shit, one of the greatest guitar players, and I can't even freaking go up to the room and get him his guitar. Just wish I would have gone and got the damn guitar.
Even to this day, I wonder, did he want to tell me something? Did he want to say I'm sorry? I don't know. But I never really appreciated my dad. Didn't understand him. I understand him now that I'm older, that he did the best he could from his upbringing. He was probably the same kind of father that his father was. It was a tough time, but we all got through it.
And it's really a shame that, he couldn't have lived into this era, because I think that all of that indignity that he had to suffer and all of the sort of second-class gigs he had to take and all that, he would have made up for it 100 times over, because today's audience would just eat him up.
If my dad were alive today, one of the things that I would want to tell him is that I don't think he honestly knew how talented he was.
Ahead of his time, is musically, absolute, because he played so far over most of the guys' heads.
And I think that he would be probably shocked to find out that he's still in books, still in magazines, still talked about, still idolized.
I was in Tallinn, Estonia, playing last year, and there's this kid from Estonia playing a Fender Telecaster guitar. Afterwards, when I was talking to him, I said, hey, you played that Jimmy Bryant solo on the Sammy Masters thing, and he's like, yeah, Jimmy Bryant.
See, now I just got a little surprise here for you.
Wow.
I know this is something that is extremely special to you, and I've just been holding on to it for safekeeping, okay? There you go. I love you.
Got a lot of pictures of him in that hat.
Yeah.
Awesome. It doesn't fit me. There we go.
There we go.
Awesome.
Very special. A lot of memories with this hat.
Cool. It's for you and your family to,
Thank you.
have forever.
It's a very special gift. Thank you very much.
And God bless those musicians. And God bless me and you. And thank you so much.
And Jimmy Bryant is one of the best.
Little Fiddle, what's your name? You don't know? Well, aren't you Little Talking Fiddle from Hollywood? No, you're not. Oh, what are you laughing for? Well, aren't you? Oh, you don't know. You don't know nothing, do you? Well, you should know that you're on Carrie's Country Store Show, don't you? You really do? No, you don't. Well, why'd you say it so fast? Well, everything you say is I don't know.